Good morning, Shmulik.
Good morning, was macht man?
Baruch Hashem. Good.
Good. Mir steigt.
Verlernt.
Baruch Hashem, Avram Yashakayach, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
Rebbe has many siyum and Yoma.
Yeah.
Friday. Morning, Yaakov.
Morning, Rabbi. Shalom Aleichem.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Peiches. We will be making the siyum on Mesechtes Yoma. We have actually a few siyumim from the Rebbe. With the help of time, we will share a synopsis of two siyumim of the Rebbe, both in Chelik Yud Zayin, one really connected more to the Mishnayos, and one on the Gemara. We left off on Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis. We are 24 lines from the top of the Amid. We just began to learn at the end of yesterday's share the Tanach Rabbanan Mitzvahs Vidui, and from the various things the Braisa pointed out is that when Vidui is being articulated in the communal Shemona Esrei, the Shliach Tzibur, Vidui is then said in the middle bracha. Let's remember that Shabbosos and Yomim Tovim, we don't have 18, 19 brachas. We only have 7 brachas, the 3 in the beginning, the 3 at the end, and the 1 in the middle. It's said in the 1 in the middle. A Yachid who is saying Vidui in his or her private Shemona Esrei, silent Shemona Esrei, they say it after Shemona Esrei. Mamish, after the final bracha, after the first time you say Yuhul Ratzim Refi. And we're going to see how this will extend itself in today's topic, which we'll be continuing to learn what is the minimum amount of confession that should be said. There's going to be some of what we will be learning today that will be connected to the Machlokes Tanoim that we began yesterday's share with. And that is whether it's a mitzvah to be mefaret the chet, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, or Shitas Rabbi Akiva that no, don't specify the sin as we explained. Just focus on the fact that we sinned against God. Similarly, there's going to be various nuscha'os of vidui, and then we're going to go from there into the Tefilla of Ne'ilah. That will be the big second topic of today. The Gemara is going to ask, "My Ne'ilas sha'arim?" Really, in the Yerushalmi, we have a machlokes whether the Ne'ilah, the closing of the gates, as Rabbi Yochanan refers to the closing of the gates in the Heichel, which is something that happened shortly after they lit the menorah, or like Rav, as it's recorded in the Yerushalmi, says that Ne'ilah She'arim means the Sharei Shamayim are closed. The machlokes in the Yerushalmi is very much connected to the machlokes we will learn today, and that is, when is Ne'ilah said? Is it said at the end of the day, but still during the daytime of Yom Kippur, or is Ne'ilah said at night? Which would lead us into the next topic, and that is whether Ne'ilah could substitute Tfilas Maidiv or not. And Bachlal, we're going to learn a little bit about Maidiv. This is a sugya that we had in Masechta Brachas. We have a machlokes whether Tfilas Arvis is Rishus, whether Tfilas Arvis is Choiva. We're going to have the big Toisvis on Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis that hopefully we learned when we learned the sugya in Brachas. We will relearn it over here. The Chiddush and Toisvis that even Lashitas, the Tfilas Arvis is Rishus. It doesn't mean Mamash Rishus. It does mean that if there is a justifiable reason why not to say it, like Motzoi Yom Kippur, and people are very hungry and people have to prepare a Su'ulas Yantiv, then according to that shita, perhaps might have need not be said. Then on Daf Peiches, we're going to review a big machlokes that we had in Nida and in other places, whether Tefilla Bismana is a mitzvah. In other words, when a person is impure, no doubt that in order for them to be able to do certain things, for them to be able to enter the Beis HaMikdash, for them to be able to eat kachim, they have to go to the mikvah. The question is it a mitzvah to go to the mikvah as soon as possible, or there's nothing wrong with delaying it until when you have such a need? And how that machlokes will play itself out, whether a person should go to the mikvah, whether a person needs to go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur itself. If a person became tamei, now nowadays, the only practical effect of being tamei, being toid, is a nida, going to the mikvah in order for her to become muteres labayla. Of course, there's no purpose of her going to the mikvah on the night of Yom Kippur, because one of the 5 inuyim is that it's aser b'tashmish hamita. So then, of course, a woman who's a nida, who's going to the mikvah, not because of tum and tara, but only laheter labayla, she'll go to the mikvah matzah Yom Kippur. But if there is an afkamina of tum and tara, and according to those that's ascribed that tefillah bismana is a mitzvah, we will indeed see that there are shitas of Tanaim that hold that even on Yom Kippur one will go to the mikvah. And the final topic of the Masechta will be the Beraisa Horoya Keri Yoma Kippurim. If a person has a seminal emission, let's not forget that we do have in Brachas Chav Beis, there was one of the big takanas of Ezra that was later overturned because it wasn't fully accepted. That if a man is a balkeri, even if there was a seminal emission inadvertently, such a person may not daven nor say words of Torah. That would demand for a person, a balkeri, to go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur. But the Gemara is going to be addressing what does that mean that a person had a seminal emission. We're speaking about a b'shoigig. And ultimately, the Gemara is going to conclude that if the person will live the year, then adarabah, that becomes noch a siman that this person will have a long life, that he's muftach, that he's a ben olam haba, that he will have children, that he would have grandchildren, and much, much more. So we are on, again, Daf Pei Zayin, Amid Beis, 24 lines from the bottom of the Amid, in the beginning of the line, Mai Amar. After the Braisa spoke about mitzvahs vidui, after we established that it said not only on Yom Kippur many times, every time you say a Shemona Esrei, but no, we say it prior to eating the final meal that we call the Su'udas HaMafsekes, Mai Amar, what are the words of vidui? Those are not the words of vidui. Let's go. So Amar Rav. Rav says that vidoy is ato yodeya rozei oilam. The Gemara is only beginning the first line of tefillah, the tefillah we have in our machzorim. Shmuel says vidoy is mimamake halei, from the depths of our hearts. Happens to be that this text of Shmuel is lost on us. We don't know the continuation of this tefillah. Levi Yomar ubeseiroscha kasuv leimoir. Not just 3 words. Now she adds, and you quote the pasuk from Achri Mois. That's Vayikra Tezayin Pasik Lamed Ki Bayoim Hazeh Yechaper Alechem L'Tayir Eschem Mikoil Chatoisechem L'Fnei Hashem Titoru. That's the Iker Vidui. Rabbi Yechanan Amar. That's Vidui. Rabbi Yechanan Amar Riboin Ho'ilamim. And as she continues, Kiloi Al Tzidkoi Seinu V'Chulei. Right now we know these tefillas. Anachnu Mapilim Tachanenu L'Fanecha Ki Al Rachamecha Rabim, etc. Rabbi Yehuda Oima Amar, that you say Ki Avoinoisenu Rabu Milim Nois, right? That our Avoinois are too many to count. V'chatoisenu Atzmu Misaper, and they're too numerous to be reckoned with. Rav Hamnuna Amar, that this is Vidui Elokai, my God. Achaloinoisarti Enokedai. Before we were formed, we were unworthy to be formed. Achshav Shenoitzarti, now that you did form us, it's as if we were not formed because our observance of mitzvahs are not the way they should be. Even when I am alive, the earthiness, the dust of my body gets in the way of my neshama, and which is why the person failed in the past of not keeping mitzvahs. When there is no neshama in the body, certainly the body won't be able to perform mitzvahs. And therefore, I'm like a kechli male busha v'chlima. I'm like a vessel that's filled with shame, that's filled with humiliation. And that going forward, and that which I sinned in the past, I'm asking God, meroik, obliterate. V'rachamecha, with your mercy, lo yedei yisuna, but not through suffering. Now, just to point out that this concept of Elikai Acheloi Noitzarti Ein Lekidai, Alpi Chasidis, like what was the ultimate cause of the creation? And as Chasidis points out, focusing on the Midrash, on the statement of Chazal, that what came to the forefront of Hashem were the Jewish people. And the way the Hasidus explains it, it wasn't only that God saw a Yid keeping a mitzvah, and that is what aroused within God the whole desire of creation, but the Yid itself. In other words, even when we were Einoi Kedai, even just the Yid itself, all of a machshava, we went up to Hashem's mind, and by him looking at his children, Hashem desired to create, which is a gavaldic way of understanding this statement. Okay, now says the Gemara, I want you to know that this Rav Hamnuna's Elikai Acheloi Nitzarti, this was a vidui that Rava said every day in the year. And by the way, we also say vidui every day in the year. We say it in the morning, we say it in Mincha, we say it by Kishon Shalamito, right? The Oshamnu Bagadnu. How the Rav Hamnuna Zuta, Rav Hamnuna the little, he said this Elikai that Acheloi Nitzarti Enakidai, he said that B'yoyme de Kippura. Okay. Now, Omar Marzutra says Marzutra, very important statement regarding all of the opinions that we learned above. That loy amaran elo the loy Omar avol anachnu chatanu. He wants to point out that there's like the ikir vidui, and then there is the supplementary confession. The ikir vidui is to say, but we sinned. Avol anachnu chatanu. Now, by the way, Ashamnu Bagadnu, that's mamish the machlekes we learned yesterday between Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and Rabbi Akiva. If it's a mitzvah lifroi tachet, then it's to say Avol Anachnu Chotanu. When we go through Ashamnu Bagadnu Gazalnu the Barnefer, we specify. If according to Rabbi Akiva, the main thing is not to focus on the specific item that we ruined in the world, that needs to be rectified, that we could rectify, but what we need to rectify, but the ikir is that we were moided b'malchus, that the Chotanu. That's it. All of the Avedas have the same commonality. We sinned against God. Then there is no more need to add all of the supplementaries. And we do both. We begin the vidui by saying Aval Anachnu Chotanu, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava we say Ashavnu Bagadnu. And then throughout the vidui we add, aside of Shmuel's statement, like which was Mamash's text is lost upon us, we incorporate in our vidui on Yom Kippur everything that was mentioned above. Okay. And the Amar, how do we know that the Ikir vidui is simply to say to God, but we sinned? Because the Amar bar Hamdudei, that once Hava Kamina Kamei de Shmuel, I was once standing in front of Shmuel. And the Hava Yosef, and he was sitting during the Shliach Tzibur's prayer, but the Chimata Shlicha de Tzibura, when he came up to the part of davening where he said, Avol anachnu chatanu. What happened? Kamekam Shmuel then stood up, and as we don't know, indeed, we paskin that way that we are to stand during vidui. Now we really specify the long Hashamnu on Yom Kippur by the Al Chet, and again, like with all of the specifics, we stand then. So Shmuel stood up when the words were said Avol anachnu chatanu, and when all of the other supplementary parts of vidui were said, Shmuel was sitting. That's how Bar Hamdudei knows, Shmami know, that Iker Vidui, Haihu. The main Vidui is Pasha to say, Avol Anachnu Chatanu. And also interestingly, that when we say Avol Anachnu Chatanu, many different nuschais, but there is a commonality. It all begins with a sipur from the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Tefilla there would sing it with Afreilach and Niganach. Right? We have a niggin that's a little bit, it's not the saddest niggin, but it's a little bit of a Yom Kippur slow, introspective type of niggin. He had a freilich niggin. Dafka when he said, Oshamnu Bagadnu, and he was asked, what singst du? So he says, what don't you understand? He says, if there is a melech and he has a palace and there's schmutz there, and someone is zoicha to remove the dirt, freilach, it's a mitzvah. Good. Tanan Hassan. Now that we established what vidui is, And we learned above in the Braisa that the mitzvah of vidui is to be said throughout the day. And the Braisa also quoted, not beside of the addition before Sudas HaMafsekes, by Ne'ilah. So now let's start to focus on this Ne'ilah. Tanan Asam, we learned over there, this is referring to a Mishnah in Masechta Tainis. That B'shloisha Parakim Bashana, that there are 3 occasions during the year that Kohanim are noisim eskapeim, that the Kohanim lift up or they raise up their hands. A Yid raises his hands to give a bracha. And indeed, physically, the Kohanim have to raise their hands when they give the Birchas Kohanim, but they raise their hands, you know how many times a day? 4 times during the day. Shachris, which is common nowadays. Musaf, also common nowadays, by those who have a minute to be noisim, for the Kohanim to be noisim eskapeim every day. Mincha is not so pashut because during days that one is allowed to eat, being that in the Beis HaMikdash, one of the Chazals, why Nadav and Avihu passed away, it's very clear from the juxtaposition in the Torah, Yain v'Sheicher al Teish, is because they were under the influence while they did the Avodah, which includes Birchas Kohanim. During the year, since we are allowed to eat after davening, it's possible that the Kohen or the Shliach Tzibur that is channeling the Birchas, the words of the Birchas Kohanim, that he might be under the influence. So it's not said. But on fast days, nowadays, the Shliach Tzibur says, Hamshuleshes. Come on. Just to make that clear, by the way, it's not Hamshuleshes Batoira. Birchas Kohanim is not written 3 times in the Torah. It's a bracha that's Mishuleshes, because there are 3 psukim that is recorded Batoira. Back over here. So you say it so there are a few times, at 3 occasions that you say it by Shachris, by Musaf, and by Mincha. Obviously, we are referring to fast days. And Ubene'ilah She'arim. That's the 4 times. Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah. When are the 3 Perakim? So B'tainiyos, again, we're going to learn in Masechta Tainiyos, we don't have now on our fast days Ne'ilah. But when it came to the fast days that are connected to the lack of rain, and there are various groups of fasts, at a certain point, there was an addition of Ne'ilah. I just want to say that there is no Musaf then. That's a problem. And B'ma'amadois, similar to the fact that the groups, that the Kohanim were divided into the 24 Mishmaros, there is a Yid for a Yid to stand and observe his private carbon being brought. Therefore, by the communal Karbanos, it would be ideal for the Yidden to stand and to observe it. Now, how can you have all the Yidden observing every day the communal Karbanos? So we chose outstanding Yisraelim to represent us. And we divided all of the Yidden also into 24 groups. Same system that every group worked for 1 week at a time. Mamish, the way the Kohanim worked for 1 week at a time. And they weren't all there. Every group was divided itself into 2 parts. You had the one that went to the Beis HaMikdash and they stood and observed the Avodah on behalf of everyone else. And there was a group that would stay in their cities and they would daven special davenings when it was their week. Not only that, 4 days out of the week they fasted. We're speaking not about a 24-hour fast. We're speaking about from the morning, from Alois until Seis. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll learn all about this in Tainus and in other places. So also during those 4 fast days, they said Ne'ilah, and they also would be Noisei Yadayim because they're fasting in their minyanim. By the way, here again, by the Mamados, in their minyan, there was no Musaf. So it's not that the Braisa is saying, the Tanach, that the Mishnah is saying that in all of these Perakim, which is Tainiyas, Mamados, and Yom Kippur, that Nesiyas Kapayim was said 4 times in the day. No, if there wasn't Musaf, it wasn't said 4 times. It means that whenever there was davening, they would say, but that's what it means. There would be a Birchas Kohanim. Okay, so now that we're speaking about Ne'ilah, now what are we seeing? We're seeing over here that Ne'ilah is not unique to Yom Kippur. By us it is. But in these communal fast days, and in the Maimados, for those Yidden that were in the Maimad and on Yom Kippur, there is Ne'ilah. So frag the Gemara, my Ne'ilah sha'arim. And again, there's a machlokes that we just spoke out on the intro that we have in the Yerushalmi between Rabbi Yechanan and Rav. We know the Taich, the closing of the gates. What gates? Rabbi Yechanan says it's referring to the closing of the gates of the Heichel. And for the record, the gates of the Heichel were closed dafka still during the daytime of the day. At the end, after they lit the menorah. Rav says, no, Ne'ilah Shi'ara means that they are closing the gates in the heavens. The gates are specially opened on Yom Kippur, and when are they closed? After night. And that will be very much connected, even though the Gemara doesn't link it, but all of the Mefarshim link it between when should Ne'ilah be said. And even until today, depends if there's a drasha before Ne'ilah, depends if there's another fundraiser before Ne'ilah, as a borderline, just as a pashut. And that will be very much connected to our topic right now, which will be fascinating. Says the Gemara, my Ne'ilah Sha'arim. So for what is it? So Rav says, it's mamish et soloisa yiserte. It's an additional bona fide shmoyna esrei. I know the word shmoyna esrei means 18. Shabbos and Yom Tov, we don't say 18, we say 7 brachas, but it means, it's what we call the amidah. It's this, which is the way we do it. Shmuel says, no, it isn't another shmoyna esrei. It's what you might call, it's an add-on that we taka say in it. And all Ne'ilah is the ma'anu mechayenu, etc. He's just quoting the beginning of that prayer. By the way, we say this every day in the morning. Okay, that according to Shmuel is the whole Ne'ilah. So frag the Gemara, and we will refute Shmuel, right? The Meisvei Akasha and Shmuel from a Braisa. We had this in the beginning of Pesachim, and the Gemara wanted to understand the meaning of the word Oir La'aba Asar. Remember that whole beginning? There was the initial understanding of the Machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna over there. Based on the initial understanding that Oir means day, we were going to prove, and we take a proof that Oir means the night going into. And one of the rayas that they brought was from this Braisa. Or Yom Kippur, which means the night going into Yom Kippur, what we would call Kol Nidrei night, Mispalal Sheva, which is a Shmoyna Esrei, again, Shabbos and Yom Tov, they're in 18, you have the 3 and the 3 and the 1 in the middle, Umisvada. Umisvada would mean both, like we learned above. The Yachid after, before we take the 3 steps back, but it's after you finish all of the brachas. By the repetition, it was in middle. B'Shachris, Mispalal Sheva, Umisvada. B'Musaf, Mispalal Sheva, Umisvada. B'Minche, Mispalal Sheva, Umisvada. B'Ne'ilah, look what the Braisa says, not like Shmuel. Mispalal Sheva, Umisvada, B'Feidish. Now we're going to follow the Nusach, the Girsa of the Gra, who takes out from here until the end of the line. It's not in here. Go to the next line. And now there is another machlekes in this Braisa. What is the chasima of the middle bracha? Being that when the Shliach Tzibur repeats the Shemona Esrei, right? Vidu you said in Be'emtza. So normally on Yom Tov, you remember, how do we finish the middle bracha? So on Shabbos, Mekadosh Shabbos. On Yom Tov, Mekadosh Yisrael Viv. The Hazmanim, on Yom Kippur, Mekadosh Yom HaKippurim. But Rav Meir says that on Ne'ilah, you finish it with Vidui, which is Baruch Ato Hashem Hokel HaSolchon. You focus how God is forgiving because we confess, because it's Yom Kippur. However, that's Rav Meir. The Chachamim say that Mitzpalel Sheva, also Ne'ilah is a bona fide Shemona Esrei. Unlike, again, guys, by all of the other middle brachas of Yom Kippur, you finish Mekadosh Yisrael v'Yom HaKippurim. But on Ne'ilah, im rotzo lachtoim bevidui chaysim. You could say Baruch Ato Hashem Hokel HaSolchon. You could conclude the middle bracha as you do by all the other middle brachas of the Mispalel Sheva, which is Baruch Ato Hashem Mekadosh Yisrael v'Yom HaKippurim. But what do we see according to both of these Tanoim? The only arguing, what is the nusach of the chasima of a bracha, of a bona fide, what we call Shemona Esrei? No one says like Shmuel that the ganze Ne'ilah is not a real, structured Amida prayer. And indeed, to Yufta, the Shmuel to Yufta. However, as we will see, even though Shmuel was to Yuftad, but the nusach that he would say for Ne'ilah was incorporated in our Ne'ilah. And that's beautiful. Just because they didn't completely disregard that which we said. And that's the following stories. That Ula Barav, who once merited Nachis Kamei Derava, he went down, meaning that the stender, where the Shliach Tzibur would stand, would then be physically in the lowest place of the shul. Many shuls went down. You have this today in Prague, in the Altanai shul. It's still as it was in the times of the Maral. And that's because Mimamaken Kirosicha, that the Einov Lamato, even though Liboy Lamaila. But anyways, that's the way. Ula was the Shliach Tzibur. And when he davened Ne'ilah, it was a proper Shemona Esrei. That means there were the three brachas that we always begin with. Then how does the middle bracha begin on Yom Tiv, including on Yom Kippur? Ata v'chartanu. It's clearly not like Shmuel. And then what he did was, since he knew that Shmuel held that Ne'ilah is ma'anu mechayenu, so before he was chosim, the middle bracha, he incorporated Shmuel's tefillah. Uv'siyam b'me'anu mechayenu. And you know what? The Shavchei Rav, and Rav praised him. Or V'Shavchei, I'm sorry, let me get the right nusach here. It can't be Rav, because he went in front of Rava.
Rava.
Thank you. V'Shavchei Rava, thank you, but I want to read the Bach. The Bach has another story. That the same thing, the Gemara has another Amoira. I'm reading inside Bach Gimel that Rav Nassan Avua the Rav Huna Berei the Rav Nassan. Also Nachas Kamei the Rav Papa, and he also said a proper Shemona Esrei for Ne'ilah. Pasach ba'ata v'chartanu, but he also added that what Shmuel said. V'siyam b'me'anu v'shavchei Rav Acha Berei the Rav. And now the final statement here is v'yachid oimra achar tefillasoi. Meaning, now that we established, we learned this at the end of yesterday's share, that the Yachid Bechlal during Yom Kippur says the entirety of the Vidui after Shemona Esrei, after we finish the brachos, after we finish the blessings. So a Yachid should also add Shmuel's Ma'onu Mechayenu after we finish. Notice we also incorporate Shmuel's Ne'ilah in our Shemona Amida Ne'ilah prayer. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Rav, says Rav, I want you to know that Tfilas, Ne'ilah, Poiteres, Es, Shel, Avos. After you daven Ne'ilah, you don't have to daven Ma'ariv. Some people we know are Noyek Rav today. They hear the shofar and they're good. Havdalah you got to make. But Ma'ariv, okay, you davened already, Moshe daven. How many times? Nacham davening. Rav lo timing. The Amar, Soloiso Yiserihi, it's connected. If Ne'ilah would have been like Shmuel, Bechlal was no Shemona Esrei, then of course, how can Ne'ilah take the place of Ma'ariv? But since Rav already established that it's a bona fide Amida prayer, to keep him the Tzolile, you davened already, it's Sulei Tzarech. And as we see in a moment, this is very much connected to Rav's understanding that Ne'ilah could be said at night. That will be the Nakuda here. Because if Ne'ilah has
Shlema, you're not on mute, Shlema.
We'll do that. We'll take care of that. Baruch Hashem. Now, Ufrek the Gemara, what? Rav says you don't have to do it to me. Omar Rav Hachi. Omar Rav. Rav said that halacha kedivrei ha'omer tfilas arvis reshus. Tfilas arvis reshus means it's optional. How can Rav say the word poiteres? The word poiteres can only be used if there is a chiyuv. This mechuyev to daven ma'ariv. So Ne'ilah pater is the chiyuv. Since Rav says ma'ariv to begin with is not a chiyuv, how can he use the word poiteres? So answers the Gemara, you're right. Rav holds that ma'ariv to begin with is only a reshus. Rav made the statement that Ne'ilah is poiteres ledivrei ha'omer, that ma'ariv is a chayva. And quickly, just the big Tosfos. We had this in Brachas. Hopefully we spoke it out then. Tosfos asks, how can there be a shita, any shita that says that ma'ariv is only reshus? We know that was the whole story over there. How, let's speak in the positive, how Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was promoted, all because of that machlokes that they had, whether it's reshus, whether it's chayva. He asks two questions. First of all, the Gemara says, and no one debates that if a person forgot to daven ma'ariv, tashlumin 2 times shachris. How can you make tashlumin for something that you're not obligated? Another question Tosfos says that it says in Brachas, Filas HaShachar, that if not on Cholamoid, on Rosh Chodesh, that if we forgot to say Yalav Yavoy, on Ma'ariv, we don't have to repeat it. Why? The Gemara gives a reason, because since the Beis Din was only Mekadesh, the Chodesh B'yoim, so you didn't mention Rosh Chodesh at night, which means if not for that reason, you would have to repeat it. Why would you be obligated to repeat something that to begin with is not a chiyuv? Therefore, Tosfos, that's the famous Omeri. I'm just reading a few words on the Tosfos. That Nehi de Reshusi, even according to those that say it's a Reshus, ein lavatlo bechinam. Reshus never meant, says Yaakov Avinu was Masakin Ma'ariv, but you should have as an option. We're not into azifal options. Reshus means that there's more leeway if there is a justifiable reason not to say it. And then Tosfos further explains that, I'm reading inside that, since Belelli Yoma Kippurim, mitzvah letroyach ulahachin sarchei seuda, we wish each other good yontif, matzah yom kippur, that's called not bechinam. And what Tosfos doesn't mention is that we have a minig. Many people begin already building the sukkah. We'll mention this when we come more closer to the siyum today, God willing. Point is, that is a reason why not to daven ma'ariv. It's amazing. You know what Tosfos doesn't mention? That people are starving, that people are anxious, that it's not comfortable. Tosfos doesn't mention that at all. He's speaking about since there are mitzvahs to do that night, it's not called bechinam, and there, l'rav, you b'chal don't have to say it. So why did Rav say ne'ilas poiteres? He meant that even those who say that it's a chayva, it's also poiteres. Let's go back into the Gemara. Meis 3 lines from the bottom. It says in a Braisa, Oir Yom Kippurim. Again, Oir means the night going into Yom Kippur, what we call Kol Nidrei night. Mispalol Sheva Misvade, Shachris Mispalol Sheva Misvade, Musaf Sheva Misvade, B'ne'ilah Mispalol Sheva Misvade Arvis. And now we have this whole discussion about how do we daven ma'ariv? Tanach says mispalel sheva me'en shmona esrei. You daven ma'ariv, but everyone should say the havinenu. Remember, we learned that in brachas. That means there is there is a short version in which all of the 12, now 13 middle brachas are put into one. And why would we do that? We make the Shemona Esrei Shmola. Look inside the last Tosfos in the Amid. Mispalal Sheva Me'en Shemona Esrei Brachos Perush Rashbam Kaima Mishum the Kiven the Akatahu B'Tainis. Here at least he mentioned fast. Not that you're hungry. Since you're fasting, it's like you're still in Yom Kippur. It's still holy. Not hunger. You're fasting. It's like Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, like every other Yom Tiv, you don't daven Shemona Esrei Brachos. You only daven Sheva Brachos. And we had this whole sugya in brachas. That's in Daf Chav Ches, Amud Beis, Daf Chav Tes, Daf Lamed, that whole sugya of Havinenu. And what about Atachin Antonu? However, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says in the name of his parents, Shema Voisav can be. Maybe theoretically you would be right, but Mispalo Shmena Esrei Shleimo is Daf Pei Ches. You know why? Because since you have to say Havdalah B'Chain and Hadoas, and again, if you want to have time, look inside the top Tosfos over here. We learned over there in brachas, that you can't add Havinenu, you can't add Atachin Antonu in the Havinenu. And the Gemara asks, why not? You abbreviate everything. Why not abbreviate? The Gemara asks that over here. Tosfos speaks it over here. But that's an issue. Theoretically, Amoida, Matzah Yom Kippur, before you break the fast. It means if someone is chalishing and they break, there's nothing he wants. The minute, if you hear the shofar, which is only blown at the end of the Zman, now you make a person is fainting, they should hear Havdalah and they should eat. Then L'Kula Alma, when you daven Ma'ariv later, you have to daven the whole Shemona Esrei. The reason why we had one Tana that says you are allowed L'Chatchila to say Avinenu is because since you are fasting, it's considered to a certain degree you're still in Yom Tiv. And on Yom Tiv, you don't say 18 brachas, 19 brachas, you only say 7. Bottom line is, according to Rav, you don't daven Ma'ariv. Not only Tfilas Arvis Rishus, don't daven Ma'ariv, even Chayva Ne'ilah is in the place of Ma'ariv. So indeed, says the Gemara, we could have said that Aftano Palaku, we don't have to go there, because it is a already known Machloikes Tanoim, Tanoihim, De Tanyom. Now this is a link, this is a Gemara link. It's not an explicit Machloikes Tanoim, but we'll understand that the following argument will be contingent on whether Ne'ilah is said during the daytime of the day, or whether Ne'ilah said at night. And obviously, if Ne'ilah said at night, that's Shitas Rav, right? Like we just quoted from the Yerushalmi, that it has to do with Ne'ilah Sharei Shamayim. The Sharei Shamayim are not closed when it's dark, when it's getting dark. It's only closed when it's night. It's opened until the end of Yom Kippur. And Ne'ilah is when it's being closed, at night. So therefore, since you daven Ne'ilah at night, and Ne'ilah is a Shemona Esrei, it's in the place of Ma'ariv. According to those who hold that Ne'ilah at least should be initiated, you should start it during the day, at the end of the day, but during the daytime. Daytime is not the time for Ma'ariv. It can never take the place of Ma'ariv. Now, where do we see that Machloikes over here in Tanoim? When do you start Ne'ilah? They never debated that directly, but here we go to a Me'inyan Le'inyan. Kol Chayavei Tefilla.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Your quick question. According to Rav, so we don't do Ma'ariv, When do you do Atachan Antanu? Mati Yom Kippur.
Okay, so you say it. You say Baruch Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Choil, and you make Havdalah. Same thing one does today if they forgot to daven Ma'ariv or if they forgot to insert the Atachan Antanu.
So presumably we don't have the Havdalah and Shemini Esrei according to Rav.
According to Rav, you know what? Danny, good point. See if one of them Mefarshim say, no, you won't have it. You're not going to say Havdalah when you're saying Ne'ilah. It doesn't make sense. Correct. You would not have it in the Shemini Esrei. Very good point. Okay. So what's the machlokes? Kol chayavei tefillos. Now, many people are mechuyev to go to the mikveh to go out of the state of Tumah into the state of Tahara. And like we spoke on in the introduction, some view going to the mikveh as whenever you need, let's say, to go into the Beis HaMikdash, then you need to go to the mikveh. Before that, you're not mechuyev to become pure as soon as you could. Other people know that there's a tefillah, bismana is a mitzvah. Now, again, don't confuse this with the laws that we are familiar with, and that is that a woman, when she's in a state of nida or ziva, then she's asura labayla. And by the way, here, she goes to the mikveh as soon as she could to become muteres labayla. That's not shayich for Yom Kippur, because she can go to the mikveh. She can theoretically become muteres labayla, but she can't be with her husband because from the 5 in Nuyim, we're not allowed to have tashmish anita. So we're not talking about bein ish li ishtoi. We're speaking about a person that's tamei. And let's understand this even better. Again, Beis Brachas Chav Beis, where we introduced the time there was a period of Jewish history where if someone was a balkedi, we're going to come back to that, they were not allowed to daven. So let's go. Kol chayavei tefillah is toivel and kanar kaviyam kippurim. They go to the mikveh. For example,
daven and not allowed to daven for the yama.
Not allowed to daven at all. That was reversed. So, for example, now another details that when do people go to the mikveh? Really, only a nida and a yoledis went at night. That was the Amar Abzeda Benois Yisrael Chmiru Alatzman Shafilo Rois Tipas Dam Kechardol that they're noyig both the chumres of nida, which means they go to the mikveh at night, and there's always shivas nikim, as if they were a zav gedoyla. But just to know, really, nida is at night. The other woman that goes to the mikveh at night is a yoledis. When she finishes the week or the 2 weeks, after a boy a week, after a girl 2 weeks, she goes to the mikveh at night. So if that was oir le Yom Kippur, kol nidrei night, toiveles kedarkam b'leila Yom Kippur. Next, balkedi. If a person is a balkedi, and again the problem is he can't daven, so in toivel v'hoilach ad hamincha. Ad hamincha means only if he did not yet daven mincha. Once he daven mincha, don't go to the mikveh. Now why? So that's the Gemara's extrapolation. You know why? Because since Ne'ilah is daven that night, not a day, wait until it's night, go to the mikveh before Ne'ilah, but at least you didn't go to the mikveh. Now, one of the 5 inoim is rechitza. That's the point. And yes, we learned that the rechitza is only shel tainuk. This is not shel tainuk. But still, there's no need to go on Yom Kippur. That's the reason behind the Tanach. So it's based on two points. Number one is that Ne'ilah has to be at night. That's the Nakuda here. And the whole purpose of a Balkedi to go to the mikvah is to be able to daven, Gesundheit, go to the mikvah at night after Yom Kippur and daven Ne'ilah. That will be Shitas Rav that holds, you daven that night, it substitutes Ma'ariv. However, Rabbi Yossi says, Koloyim Kuloi, even if you already daven Mincha, you are a Balkedi, go to the mikvah. Is a raya, that's the Gemara's understanding, that Rabbi Yossi holds that Ne'ilah is not said at night. It has to be said during the day, the end of the day, but during the day. And therefore, how can Ne'ilah take the place of Ma'ariv? And therefore, a Balkedi, in order for him to be able to say Ne'ilah, will go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur. Again, now it's not shaykh. Now, because since we revoked the takana, this takana of Ezra made 10 takanas. This was not accepted ultimately. So now, just to know, a Balkedi will not go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur, because now a Balkedi is allowed to say words of Tefilla. Let's go back. It's a contradiction on Rabbi Yossi, and if all of the Tanakamas are the same, it will be a contradiction on the Chachamim also. It says in another Brais, Hazov, veHazova, veHamitzoira, veHamitzoira'as, uboyol nida, Tumei meis, all people that are in the state of Tumah, that whether they have to wait 7 days the time comes for them to go to the mikveh. If the time comes on Yom Kippur, or Balkeri on the same day, right? A boyel nida who has a din of a nida on the seventh day, can we get my kippurim? And then noch the details. When? Depends. If it's a nida, if it's a yeledis, then she's toivelis kedarkan the night going into Yom Kippur. At night. A Balkeri, Nachamol, says the Tanakama, says the Chachamim, toivel v'hoilach, kol hayom kuloi, mashma, even after mincha. Now, there's no author to the first Tanakama and to the second Tanakama, so we're not going to focus on it, but we will see clearly, obviously, it's not the same Chachamim. Not the same Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi, here it's a problem. Rabbi Yossi says, Mina mincha ulamayla ein yachol litva. That if the Yid already daven mincha, then he becomes a Balkeri. Don't go to the We just learned in Braisa number 1, clearly that Rabbi Yossi holds that Ne'ilah is daven during the day. Rabbi Yossi clearly says, even after mincha, you go to the mikvah. Contradiction. Says the Gemara, like kasha. Even according to Rabbi Yossi, that mincha is daven, that Ne'ilah is daven during the day. The second Braisa that says, don't go to the mincha, don't go to the mikvah, you daven mincha, you daven ne'ilah, now you become a balkeri. That is where Rabbi Yossi says, don't go to the mikvah, because it's all about you being allowed to daven, shenge daven. The second price is that solely tefillas ne'ilah. You take a daven during the day, but you daven ne'ilah. The first brisa, where Rabbi Yossi says that clearly that you toivel, the first brisa that says that kol hayom kuloi, that's only if you didn't get daven ne'ilah. Frag the Gemara, and that's not a good answer. If the second Braisa is speaking about a case that you already davened Ne'ilah, the Tzali, then why would the Chachamim say that we want to make their machlokes in the same case? Like in the first Braisa, it was beautiful. You daven Mincha, you didn't daven Ne'ilah, that was the machlokes. As we explained, if you have to daven Ne'ilah during the day, you have to go to the mikvah. If you can wait until the night, go to the mikvah, daven Ne'ilah. But coming over here, if the second Braisa is speaking about a Yid that already daven Ne'ilah, why would the Chachamim, so why Tamid Rabbanon? Wait, Shenge davened. This Chachamim of the second Braisa is another Shita. They hold Tefilla Bismano Mitzvah. In other words, you go to the mikvah not only because you can't do something without going to the mikvah. Whenever you are able to go to the mikvah, which is any balkeri, right after the seminal emission, go to the mikvah. Go to the mikvah. There's a mitzvah to go the first opportunity. Yovaldik. So,
Rabbi, does that mean a woman whose husband is out of town, according to that opinion, would always go to the mikvah, even if she's not going to be with her husband?
No question about that. We spoke this out in Nidam, even though that we also spoke out in Nidam that I'll pick Kabbalah if a woman who went to the mikvah, who won't be with her husband, at least there being some physical contact, then I'll pick Ruchnis, I'll pick Kabbalah, she's a little bit in danger, there can be some demonic forces that one might have a relation with her. And for that, the two things, she wears a garment of her husband and she puts a gun under her pillow here in LA with the guns, or normally put a knife. The Yiddish knives, a little plastic knife, epis, she puts to scare away the demons, and it works. Okay, right. Now, hold on. 1 second. Here's the problem. If that's the way we are explaining the second Braisa, no, Rabbi Yossi says that if a Yid daven mincha, they daven ne'ilah. Ne'ilah is by day. But Rabbi Yossi says after ne'ilah, a man becomes a balkeri. Don't go to the mikvah. Why not? Because you don't have to go today, you'll go tomorrow. That means that Rabbi Yossi holds that Tefillah Bismana is not a mitzvah. We got a problem. Tanya says in another Braisa, Harei Shohaya Shem Kosov Al Basarei, some Chacham has Hashem's name written on his body. We're not speaking about someone, God forbid, that tattooed it in their body. Never. We're speaking about, it's written. The issue here is that going to a bath, the waters can erase God's name. So says Taka the Brais, lo yirchatz, don't go to the bath, don't anoint yourself on that area. On the other hand, you have Hashem's name on you. So you can't go into an area where there's physical filth. If nizdam noloy tfilas mitzvah, and now what do? How do you go into the water? So the Tanakama says, koirach olav gemi, you have to find some sort of reed grass, and you put it over the shame. Guys, when we learned about this, we spoke about what about chatzitza. So it has to be put enough that it doesn't make a chatzitza, but it protects the written name of God from it being erased. However that works. You put a gemi, v'yoyed v'toiv. Once we are demanded to get a gemi, that means we may not go to the mikvah without getting this reed grass. Maybe you'll have it, maybe you won't have it. It might take you time to get it. The Tanach
Rabbi, is something that's absorbent considered a chatzitza?
Let me word it this way, that if after the fact the water went completely through, if a person was wearing a beggar, they went to the beach, then maybe you can say that on a doiraisa level.
Now I'm talking about this gemi, maybe because it's absorbent, you're covering over, it's absorbent.
No, if it would be fully absorbent, then how would it stop the shame from getting erased? It's tough. It's a tough in-between area. But bottom line is the Chachamim hold that you have to put on a gemi. Now that might delay the mikvah. Once there's a prerequisite, it might delay the mikvah. The Chachamim don't care if it's going to delay the mikvah because these Chachamim subscribe to the concept that Tefilla bismana lav mitzvah. Get a gemi, and if you won't go, if it's going to take you 4 or 5 hours and it's already halachically tomorrow, zol zayin. Rabbi Yossi says no. Yoyed v'toivel kedarkoi. Rabbi Yossi is the one that subscribes to Tefilla bismana is a mitzvah. That's a contradiction. So we cannot demand of you to get a gemi because that might delay the going to the mikvah. Eloma, he says, what's the issue? You are erasing God's name. That's not your kavanah. As long as while you are under the water, don't rub the name. And v'kaimelon, and we already explained that what is the underlying machlokes tefillah bismana mitzvah pligi or not. In other words, that Rabbi Yossi is the one that says tefillah bismana is a mitzvah. So doesn't that contradict the Rabbi Yossi that we just learned in the Braisa? That we explained the whole machlokes in the second Braisa was whether tefillah bismana mitzvah or not. So what does he subscribe to? In this Braisa of the shame, he holds it is a mitzvah. In the prior Braisa, he seems to be saying it's not a mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Hahi means the Braisa of Yom Kippur is not Rabbi Yossi, but it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. And it is Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda that holds that tefillah bismana is not a mitzvah. You're not mechuyev to go this earliest opportunity. And where do we find that? The Tanya, that was a very fascinating case that we had Barichus and Nida. Daf Chavtes, Daf Lamed, who was also repeated on Shabbos. Here we're speaking about Azam Maisa, a woman with amnesia. Like this, a woman was pregnant. She doesn't remember when she miscarried. She doesn't know whether she miscarried a boy or a girl. And she doesn't remember whether she was a Yeledes Bezov, if you remember that sugya. And if you remember, there was a Beishamai that says that she has to go to the mikveh 95 times. It's a whole math cheshbon about maybe today she has to go to the mikveh, maybe tomorrow. Besilol chaps only 35 times. Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says, I don't see the question. Let all of the days of the doubt go. And at the end, go to the mikveh once. That was another source that, why couldn't Beishamai say that? Of course, she anyways will not be muteres until the last time because maybe every tefillah is a suffix. Beishamai and Besilol hold tefillah b'zman as a mitzvah. You got to do it. And if there's maybe she becomes Tohira today, you got to do it. That's the Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, well, Haknishka 95 times, 35 times. So Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda will be the author of the Tana above that holds, since Tefillah Bisman is not a mitzvah, Ne'ilah is takadav that day. But if you already daven Ne'ilah, then a Balkedi should not go to the mikvah. Okay, so now that we dealt with Tumantar of a Balkedi, let's go to the final topic. This whole concept, first of all, Re'iyas Keri b'mezid is from the Avedas Chamurais, for which there's Chiv Misa b'dei Shamayim. Elama, we're speaking about a shoygeg. Hold on. So Tana Rabbanan, Horoya Keri b'Yom HaKippurim. So again, Yoyred v'Toivel should go to the mikvah. This Braisa holds you go to the mikvah. This is during the time that one was not allowed to daven if they were a Balkedi. Going to the mikvah, by the way, would not take away their tumah enough for them to be able to go into the Beis HaMikdash. You would need to have head of Shemesh, but even to go on Harabayis, you have to wait until night. But to daven right after the mikvah, but at the evening you should rub your body with hot water. Check the water. What are you talking about? What do you mean? You already went to the mikvah. There's a chatzitza issue. You have to rub something off. After you go to the mikvah, you deal with rubbing something off. Le'erev, my da'ava. So the answer is the Gemara, no. What the Braisa means to say is that normally when a Yid enters Yom Kippur, because of the Isser of Rechitza, you don't plan to go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur. But based on this Tana that holds, during that time, if a person became a Balkeri, they have to go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur. If a person has dirt on their body, according to these Tanoim, the high standard of chatzitza that say women have today would go on a man. So prior to Yom Kippur, you should be yeshav sheif. So just in case there's real dirt on your body, you rubbed it off, you sat in a bath. Like this, if you'll have it, on Yom Kippur, that's easy. You'll wipe that away and you'll go to the mikvah. The yeshav sheif means prior to Yom Kippur, get rid of all other chatzitzas. Is the charaya in parentheses kasavar mitzvah l'shav sheif, which is a big machlokes whether the standards of chatzitza are that high for men as well, and this Tana holds it is. Tani Tana kamei Rab Nachman. Haroi kerevi Yom Kippurim, if a person has a seminal mission on Yom Kippur, avoy noisav mechulam loy. It's a good omen. His sins are forgiven. Like Gemara, what are you talking about? It says avoy noisav sidurim. His sins are arranged. They are arranged, that they're set up for him to be punished for them. So the Gemara says no. That statement avoy noisav sidurim, they're set up for judgment or they're set up for punishment. No, it means sidurim limach. It's a good thing. Hold on, we're not done yet. Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael. We did learn in a Braisa Torah in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Haroya kerevi Yom Kippurim. If a person has a seminal mission on Yom Kippur, of course we're speaking about the shoygig. Yida kol hashana kola. Be worried the whole year. What's the Yida kol hashana kola? Chavra, look inside the widest line, the first widest line of Rashi, which is under the Tosfos. Yida kol hashana kola. Shema loy kibloi tanisoi. It might be a sign that he did not accept his tainus, and therefore v'hishbiyu. I'm sorry, what's Yom Kippur? The mitzvah is to be afflicted. So they wanted to show him, we're not accepting your affliction. You're not even afflicted. Here, have some pleasure. Tosfos, Rashi writes, mamish connected to what we find, as we'll see soon in Sukkah, that if it rains on Sukkahs, the mashal Chazal give is ke'eved hamizag hamoizeg kois l'rabba. You're offering as a servant a cup of water, of wine to your master, and he takes the cup and he throws it in your face. I don't want you to serve me. So we're trying to offer God our affliction. Seeing a keri means, it could mean that God is telling you, I don't accept your affliction. Here, you're not even afflicted. And you should be worried. What should you be worried about? That means if we were not forgiven, we might pass away that year. But the im also loishana. But if a person did not pass away, says Rashi, shaloi meis, muftach loy shehu ben olam haba. That means like this. That means that a person has so many schusim that it overcompensated something negative with the haroya keri. Says Rashi, muftach loy shemaisim toivim yesh biyadoi shehiginoi olav. No, l'chayret means that the keri itself is not a good omen. Eloma, you lived. That means you have so many zchusim. So then you're muftach shu b'elam haba. And indeed, Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Teda, that what? Teda, that you're ben olam haba. After you survive the year, you know what? It comes out retroactively. That shekol olam kuloi roiv. Everyone was starved. Everyone went through a day with all of the inuyim. And you were granted saveya. God gave you, that means it's good. After the year, you can interpret it in the opposite way. And furthermore, Kiyasid Avdimi, when he came back from the Holy Land, he said, and we'll read the words inside when we make the siyum, but I'll read it right away in English, that you will have a long life. And you will have children and you'll have grandchildren, because Zera now will become interpreted, the last Rashi in the Masechta, Yira Zera Yarech Yomim. So to repeat like this, the Rebbe in Chelik Yud Zayin, we have Achrim Aleph and Beis. We'll begin with Beis, then we'll go back to Aleph. Here the Rebbe, in Chelik in Sicha Aleph, the first Sicha is the Siyum on the Gemara. And here, the big question is, the Masechta should end on a negative note. The whole tractate of Yoma is about kapara. It's about slicha and mechila. It's about tshuva. And here the last topic is something negative. Haroya keri v'yom ekpurim yidag. And keri is from the Avedas Chamuras. True, it was b'shoigig, but still, it's not something positive. V'haraya yidag kol hashana kula. So the Rebbe says, Adarabah, that's the whole message of Yoma. That's the whole message of Yoma, which is connected to tshuva. That what is the power of tshuva, as we just had a few days ago from Reish Lakish, when there's tshuva mi'ahava, that Zedoino is not only nasu kishgogois, but nasu kizachios. How can a sin become a mitzvah? Because after the person sins, we have the power to redefine the sin. First of all, as we mentioned, a sin separates man from God temporarily. Once a person realizes how much the sin separated the person, so he becomes that much more thirsty for God, his samoyin to be reconnected is heightened because of the sin. So then the sin became a catapult for something positive. And not only is it between man and God, but even the action, since the action, which at that time was interpreted as a sinful, and it was a sinful action. But when a Yid does tshuva, he redefines the act itself. It becomes an act that motivated him and or her to get closer to God. So the Rebbe says that's the whole message, that the whole power of Yom Kippurim is that we are able to redefine the past. And the Gemara doesn't say that if a person saw a keri, simin rao. The Gemara doesn't say it. It says yidag. Yidag because Yidak means that a Yid will think to himself, it wasn't that I chose, God forbid, to do something wrong. I'm trying to do the best. And why is it that Bahashgacha Pratis, I saw a keri, which that in itself, without giving a deeper meaning, is not something positive, because God says I can do better. God is trying to arouse within me a motivation to do a deeper tshuva and to add more my. So once I did a deeper tshuva and I added Maisam Tovim, and how do I know that I succeeded? Because I lived through the year, that retroactively transforms something that's considered by per se as something negative into something positive. The Rebbe in the second Sikh and Achri Mois, just to go to the Siyoma on the Mishnayos, which is so beautiful, where we learned about Omar Abakiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, like lifnei mi atem etarim mi metayr eschem avichem shava shamayim. So the Rebbe says like this, that in the beginning of the Masechta we learn that a Kohen Gadol has to be married. Now there's a machlokes whether you need a backup wife. And Machlal, the question is why should a Kohen Gadol have to be married? One of the five inoim is tashma shamita. A man is not allowed to be with his wife on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol is quarantined for a week before Yom Kippur, not with his wife. So why do you have to be married? And the Rebbe explains that a man being married and the din that a Kohen Gadol has to be married is not a din in the avodah of Yom Kippur. It's a din in the Kohen Gadol. A married person is a different type of person when you have the marriage the way it should be. Marriage reveals your selflessness. Only someone that's in a marriage, which means that is able to step out of his selfish being and he becomes included in something greater than him, such a person is a person that God wants to do the avodah. So the Rebbe says that what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that avichem shava shamayim, that even prior to tshuva is megala. The fact that we couldn't do, how can we do tshuva? A person did something against the will of God. The power of tshuva begins by the fact that we are not separate from God. We are God's banim. That God is our Father. It's a whole different thing. A child can never be really severed from the Father in heaven. A child and a father are connected. Now, on an external level, a parent can be angry at a child, God forbid, can do the same thing. But once you're megala something deeper, that's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur brings out how we are God's children and God is our Father. And that is the base. Therefore, we were never disconnected. And that is what gives us the koyach to reveal that essential connection through the mitzvah of tshuva, which is connected to the mitzvah of vidui. And all of that comes out particularly by ne'ilah, where the yechidah sheba nefesh that was never disconnected from God is something that becomes a lot closer for all of us to touch, to connect to. And with that we say, Hadran Allah, Yom Kippurim, and Mazal Tov for finishing the Masechtas Yoma. We will learn, God willing, the next Masechta will be Sukkah. And there is a link between Yoma and Sukkah. as we learn, and especially in Hasidus, that from the main avodas lefnai v'lefnim, the first thing that the Kohen Gadol brought in there was the kaf and the macht, was the avodah of the ketores. And the ketores is the source of the schach. And as we will learn in Sukkah, the machloikis tanoi, and there is a machloikis who says what, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, even though we're going to have our version on Daf Yud Aleph, but one of these two Tanoim say that we sit in a sukkah because we lived in booths when we left Mitzrayim, Kipshutoi. The other Tana says, no, it's the Anana Yaakov. So the schach is connected to the Anana Yaakov. The Anana Yaakov came from the Ketores. So it is Yom Kippur, like we mentioned, which is Megala the Yechidah Sheba Nefesh. And that, all of that happened going back to the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, specifically when he brought the Ketores. That manifests in the schach. The schach is the greatest light of God. It's the Oir Makiv. So first, we're going to learn about the schach. First, we will learn about Sukkah, which is connected to the Ketores. And only afterwards are we going to learn in Masech the Sukkah about the Dalad Minim. And that's going to answer the question that everyone asks, that in the Torah, the mitzvah of Dalad Minim is mentioned before the mitzvah of sitting in a Sukkah. But in the next Masechta, we're going to begin dafka with the mitzvah of the schach of Sukkah, because it is the schach that's connected to the Avodah of Yom Kippur, which represents the highest connection that exists, dafka, between the Yidden and Avichem Avinu Sheba Shamayim. Chavre Mazel Tov, to be continued.
Mazel tov.
Thank you, Rabbi. Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Which restaurant are we going to?
Huh? Which restaurant are we going to? Okay, good. We have to find out.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Question, Rabbi?
Sure.
What's the zechut of this person who was a Belelli, Beshogeg, to the entire year be thinking of dying? And second, what's the source for, where does it say that this person can die during this year if it was Belelli, Beshogeg?
Let me go in the opposite direction. The fact that Rashi says, V'im also loishana shaloimes, in other words, it could be a sign, it could be as an understanding is you, the way you are, your God does not accept your tefillas from Yom Kippur, and that could result in the worst.
Got it.
And the person has to use that and transform something negative. That's the whole word, transform negative into a positive.
Rabbi, I didn't understand the connection with Rabbi Akiva and what you said about the Kohen Gadol, about the selflessness
that
of
just like
being
the
married.
Kohen Gadol being a married person, being in a marriage, even though he cannot be with his wife, being married reveals a deeper part of who you are. You're not a yachid.
Right. So what's the connection?
Yidden on Yom Kippur have to feel that we are not separated from God. Even the biggest sinner should know, I'm beginning as a child of God. I'm beginning already as a child. Now I got to do tshuva. But it's a whole different type of tshuva.
Shkoyach, thank you. Mazel tov.